Steven gives such an intense performance. What was your biggest
Yeah.
takeaway of working with him, and the depths he was willing to go to for the character?
Just that he's a fantastic collaborator. There's a reason. There's a reason Stephen Lang has over 100 credits on his IMDb page. He's great to work with. He's still my previous couple of films I'd working with some pretty jaded individuals, and I was a little not feeling great about that. And by the time I ended up working with Slang on this, I was like, wow, this guy's been doing it for longer than a lot of us, and he still has that fire in his belly. He still is fired up and still really really cares about his craft, and excelling at his craft. So that was just it was a reminder that you can keep that fire in your belly no matter how long you've been doing this, if you've got your head in the right place.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And so
Yeah.
much of the film is just Steven and Mark Center talking, and they both give great performances. But what was the challenge in keeping those scenes visually interesting?
I think not only as a filmmaker, but just as a a person that loves film and loves watching film. It's like my DP and I and production designer and the whole team really were constantly pushing ourselves to how do we keep changing it up? How do we use a close up like a weapon? When is it appropriate to pull all the way back and let the feeling of the environment inform what's happening dramatically. So it was a really really interesting challenge to work within such a tiny little box, and but when you have great actors, that really does a lot of work for you. So it's all about just kind of getting the camera in the best place to show what the actors are doing in the best possible light.
Yeah, I think that worked really well then.
Oh, thank you.
And there's a great flashback scene with the salesman in the middle of the film. What was your approach to filming that and going between the past and present?
That was really fun, in that we were trying to tap into the feeling of somebody telling you a story and the way your mind works, the way if I tell you a story about my dog running down the street and almost getting hit by a car, that puts pictures in your head. So the idea there was to kind of in a cinematic way show the images that were that were coming into Joe's head as the old man was telling the story. And the thing that was cool about that was the way the way we jump in and out of that and the way that blended together. Very very influenced by the work of Sam Peckinpah. I think that sequence in particular, where you have like a sequence in Straw Dogs where the woman goes to a magic show in town after this awful thing that's happened to her, and all these sounds and this activity around her are triggering these memories of this traumatic thing that happened to her earlier in the day. That was a big jumping off point, and the way a filmmaker like David Lynch can really really use editing and imagery to simulate how the brain works, how the image flashes in your brain and how memory works and how it distorts and blends together with the present. That was all kind of swirling in our heads as we were putting that together. A wonderful job by my editor, Zach Passero, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
the twist in the movie is really powerful too. What was your reaction when you first read Joel Veitch's script?
My reaction was primarily to the old man character, and was to his voice. I recognized that. I knew these type of people. I'd grown up in very rural kind of country environments, and I knew kind of I knew those characters, and I thought that Joel's script really really represented that well without being judgmental. Because that's something that I try to remove from my observation of characters in my films, is being judgmental about what they're doing. It's like I want to show it, and I want to display it, and I want to dissect it, give the audience the ability to dissect it, but I don't want to be imposing my view of right and wrong, and put this kind of like moral sort of stamp over it. So yeah, I just really responded to that character, and as far as the twist, I think that any movie that hinges on a twist being its thing that gives it success is kind of doomed to failure. It's not always the case, but most often it is with me personally as a film viewer. So to me, it's like it's all about the ride itself, and how, the coolest thing about this film, I think, is that you can watch it the first time and be feeling tension in one way and feeling, this sense of mystery and everything. But once certain things are revealed to you on that first viewing, you can, the movie literally invites you to come back and watch it again. And when you do watch it again, you start to see all of this layering and all of this kind of subconscious stuff that we were kind of putting in there that ultimately all makes sense with the way the thing turns out, so it's inviting second viewings for sure. Hopefully.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And earlier we talked about visuals of the scenes of people talking, but what were also some of the challenges of having such a confined area with such a small location for a lot of the film?
Well, fortunately, we were able to shoot this on a sound stage, so that gave us a lot more flexibility than if we were actually shooting in a tiny little cabin in the mountains. And the other thing that afforded us was to be able to pack meaning into that environment, and some of it blatant, and some of it from a more kind of subconscious angle. So yeah, I mean, that was part of what excited me. You asked about what excited me about the script. Part of what excited me is that I had to work within this tiny box, and can I make that play? That was kind of scary going into that. Could we keep people's interest for 90, 100 minutes, or whatever the running time ended up being? Can you keep that dramatically engaging? Can you create enough of a feeling of mystery? And can these two men retain the audience's attention just by being super interesting with their choices and their behavior? So and I feel like Mark and Steven really pulled that off.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steven said you were always looking for more takes and that you were demanding, but in a good way. Can you talk about that thorough process?
Well, I think they felt like a lot of takes to him, but honestly, we didn't do a lot of takes per angle, but they were long takes. I mean, most days, we'd set out to shoot a 6-minute run, an 8-minute run, a 10-minute run, like uninterrupted, of these guys just dueling dialogue. But what that gives you performance-wise, when you're able to sit in something for that long, is it, even if the beginning of the take starts out a little rough and they're not quite engaged yet, by the time they get deeper and deeper into it, the feelings and the pace and everything really starts to feel more organic and more like these guys are really kind of like living in the moment. So even when we got into the edit, like our edit cues weren't based on some storyboards or some rigid plan I'd had before. They were really based on this rhythm that the actors had established. And there are certain cases where we had to modulate that for pace or anything like that, just to keep the story moving along. But I mean, you'll see in the film there's some long moments where it's just these guys, because they were just so plugged in emotionally. But when you do 3 10-minute takes going one way on one guy, and then you turn around and you do 4 takes going the other way on the other guy, that's a lot of time. If they're 10 minutes a piece, that's 70 minutes, and that's not taking into account the time between setups. So 2 or 3 hours later, you're still kind of running through that same thing. And but it was always in the spirit of chasing, a feeling of truth, and a feeling of genuine human behavior, and also just trying things, sometimes, I joke all the time that, like, whenever I do 6 or 7 takes of something, it usually means I got it on the second take. So but that's the process, because when you're shooting a film, you're excavating a piece of marble that you're going to carve up and turn into a statue later on, and it's like you kind of want the biggest piece of marble that you can have, so you have room to try things. But yeah, this one was just like an utter pleasure from beginning to end working on it. We had such a good time.